As a fisherman, I make my living on the coast. So when my son told me about protecting the coast, I thought he was going to tell me to stop fishing. But I finally went to one of them meetings with he, and it opened my eyes. Terms like climate change, storm surge, and beach erosion had me so confused. But Junior showed me that when we got a storm, we lose a bit more of the beach, and how developers, locals, tourists, and the fishing community all have to learn to use the coast without damaging the coast. If we don't do more to protect our coast, we could lose everything.
Like Freddie and Junior, there are many who rely on our coast for their livelihood. The Coastal Zone Management Unit is working to sustainably manage our coastal spaces by mitigating the impacts of climate change for generations to come through updating the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. From monitoring beach levels, restoring mangroves and wetlands, to working with community leaders and private developers, the CZMU is planning for a safer and more resilient coast. See more of Freddie and Junior's story on the CZMU and GIS social media. Play your part to manage and protect our coast, our home, our future. To view the updated ICZM plan and learn more, visit coastal.gov.bb/ICZM plan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome you to the fifth in a series of meetings for the Draft Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. This plan is being presented by a team of experts, both from the Coastal Zone Management Unit and our consultants from IH Cantabria in Spain. My name is Alison Wiggins, and I will be taking through the proceedings this evening. Let me introduce the members of our team. The first person I'd like to introduce is the chairperson of this inquiry, Dr. Yolanda Aline. And then the team from the Coastal Zone Management Unit is comprised of the director, Dr. Leo Brewster, the deputy director, Antonio Rowe, our project manager, Ricardo Arthur, our coastal information systems manager, Ramon Roach, the coastal planner, Fabian Hines, marine biologist, Richard Saku, and our technical officer, Shamari Cave. Our consultants team from IH Cantabria is headed by Raul Medina Santamaria, as well as Jonathan McHugh, who is the team leader for this particular consultancy. Then we have Maria Marino, Heather Barker, and Renee Gibson. Let me just outline the agenda for you this evening. We have opening remarks by Dr. Yolanda Aline, an introduction to the updated plan by Dr. Leo Brewster. Then we have a presentation by Jonathan McHugh, as well as Ricardo Arthur, the project manager. And then we have closing remarks by Mr. Antonio Rowe. Through our entire program, we'll be having some quick polls to make sure that you're being interactive with us and that you understand what we are presenting this afternoon. Let me say from the outset that we are giving you two options that you can bring your ideas to us, that you can speak to us. The first option is if you raise your hand, we will allow you to actually have the microphone and speak. The second option which you have is to type your comments, your queries in the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. So we have options open for you, and you will decide which option you would like to take here this afternoon. At this point in time, let me introduce the chairperson of this public inquiry, Dr. Yolanda Aline.
Thank you, Alison, and welcome everyone to this, our fifth consultation, public consultation on the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. My name is Yolanda Aline, as Alison said, and my role is to listen very carefully to all your concerns and your inputs and your contributions to this process and make recommendations on how we can improve the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan going forward. So as I'd like to say, as many of you know, we have a very intense area of activity on either side of our shoreline. On the landward side, it is estimating that more than 50% of our population and 95% of our tourism related infrastructure is concentrated along with us, you know, where we live, where we do business, a lot of our historical centers and our capital all lie in that zone. On the other hand, on the seaward side, we have a myriad of activities which we use that marine space for economic reasons, for like fishing, snorkeling. We also have sea moss harvesting. We have swimming, we surf, we do everything. It's a very active zone with potential for so much more. So 2 important observations as we go into the session. Just want to remind you that it's very difficult to manage our coastal areas in an island this size without considering the activities from the upper reaches of the watershed right through to the coastline and into the marine area. It has to be a very integrated approach. And secondly, integrated coastal zone management is essential to Barbados, as healthy oceans and coastal areas are vital to our economic future. This draft Barbados Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan is a timely intervention in the context of increasing climate and disaster risks, and combined with more development taking place in our marine areas. So now is the time for all residents to become involved in the process. We, the general public and key stakeholders, we are all custodians of our coast, and this consultation process is an opportunity for everyone to get involved. Like I said, as chair, I'm going to listen very carefully to your comments and your contributions to see how we can make recommendations for an improved plan. So I hope that many of you have had a chance to read the draft plan, but if you haven't, I just encourage you to listen very carefully to the proposed policy tools and guidelines, and then make meaningful feedback to support or improve or strengthen what has already been put on the table. So I encourage you to take notes and clear your thoughts and participate in this presentation, this interactive session, and give constructive viewpoints. And I look forward to a very meaningful and productive evening. I welcome you again to Sub-Area 5 discussion, North Point to Maycock Bay. Welcome all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aline. This sub-area, North Point to Maycock Bay, encompasses many, many bays. We have Gents Bay, we have Cloughs, we have Archers Bay, Granny's Bay, Stroeve Bay, Harrison's, and Maycock Bay. So some of you will know these areas very well. It's not only residential, but there's also industrial, there are tourism activities, commercial activities, a wide swath of activities in this area. Now, Dr. Brewster is going to come at this point and tell us about the plan. Tell us about what is this area we are speaking about? How is it different from other areas around the island? So I turn it over to Dr. Brewster, who's going to give us an introduction to the plan. Dr. Brewster.
Afternoon, Alison. Thanks a lot. I'm going to try and share my screen here now. All right. So, as we've been projecting, as we've been going around the coastline, there's several things that we need to recognize along the way. I think it's important, as we always start off, to recognize that this is part of the cycle of how we've developed the plans over the last few years. Okay, starting in 1995, we had the West and South Coast Plan developed by Delcan. The consultants hired then, where they looked at the technical feasibility and pre-investment studies project information that had been collected. It built on the diagnostic and pre-feasibility study work from the 1982 to 83 study. And it did a lot of documentation in terms of the type of history of information that we had. In 1998, we then moved on to do a comprehensive East Coast study stretching from Maycock Bay all the way around the East Coast to South Point. And we did a similar compilation of information that was collected out of those studies, especially where new information was gathered, because that was the first time that we were actively studying the East Coast in a major way. As part of all that work, we then looked to redefine how the West and South Coast data and information that had been collected from the Delcan study could be put together to be consistent with how the East Coast information and data was presented, so that we would have uniform information being represented and complementarity in terms of understanding. And then we identified several priority areas for integrated coastal zone management. We divided the coastline into 8 sub-areas and provided guidance for each of those sub-areas in terms of how they should be managed. We're now at the stage in 2021 where we've combined a comprehensive study that incorporates climate change and disaster risk reduction into the integrated coastal zone management process. And it's all the work that was accumulated out of the coastal risk assessment and management project that we have just recently concluded. And that was a very comprehensive study along the way. So why is an update needed? In our reality, with everything that's going on, and we recognize that climate change is real, we have to look at also how significant hazards can affect the coastline, and more importantly, how we will have to react to those changing coastline hazards over time, and look to see how we can achieve economic prosperity into the future for coastal communities and the island as a whole. The modern coastal management delivery model is now required for Bajans to realize that the goods and services and development opportunities that the coast provides are something that can be tangible, and they form part of a blue economy strategy. And through the processes that we're going through, we're looking to ensure that we can have a new strategy to better implement climate change and disaster risk resiliency into the climate change process, to emphasize the adaptation strategies necessary to achieve those goals. One thing that we must remember, though, is that implementing risk resiliency into climate change is not a simple task. The key differences between the two plans from 1998 and 2020 are comparable in many respects, okay? In 1998, we had 3 volumes of a document. We had the policy framework guidelines, we had the West Coast or the Caribbean Coast Integrated Coastal Plan, and we had the Atlantic Coast plan. The development guidance for the management of the coastal uses and development regulations along the coastline were established. We also looked at how the policy framework was going to be better suited to document the role and function of what the coastal zone management unit was going to be. And it focused on the institutional strengthening of the coastal zone management unit to achieve its expanded mandate. Within the 2020 plan now, we are at the stage where we've adopted the disaster risk management and climate change adaptation process into the coastal planning process to ensure that we can have effective coastal planning in the longer term to achieve risk resiliency. This has been done not only by the combined use of the information from the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Plan project, but also through the National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform, which is a supporting tool to assist us in hazards and vulnerability and risk assessment in terms of how we look at coastal planning taking place into the future. The 2020 plan also focuses on improving the capacity of the coastal zone unit to integrate the climate change considerations into coastal management and identifies new reporting structures for monitoring and evaluation of the achievements of the plan in the short, medium, and long term. This latter point is something that is very new in terms of achievable outputs along the way. The intended impact of the plan is to provide detailed guidance on the management of coastal resources. It reemphasizes the island systems management approach that we've always used, whereby we recognize that anything that happens in the center of the island can reach the coastline in as little as 2 hours. It focuses on the relationship in terms of protecting the resources, reducing the impacts from climate and disaster risk-related impacts and hazards. And it also focuses, more importantly, on the identification of the boundaries for both the coastal zone management area and a zone of influence that can impact that designated coastal zone management area. Now, the designation of the management area is essential because it is called for within the Coastal Zone Management Act and also helps to define the space in which we are best suited to operate from a regulatory perspective. The cost of doing nothing, in essence, is that if we allow the status quo to remain, the island shoreline will still be in proximity to coastal hazards with little attention being paid to the actions that are required to prevent disastrous impacts along the coastline. Mitigation measures have to be developed and agreed on at the policy level, and this has to be achieved in part both through the plan, the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan, and also the interrelated nature with which that plan, the ICZMP, interacts with the physical development plan. It must be borne in mind that while the costings for these mitigated measures are still to be determined in the broader context, it will come down to the decision between spending money on prevention and spending monies on repairing the damage after the natural disaster, which is going to be exceedingly more expensive than if you deal with prevention first. Obviously, a pound of prevention is better than 100 pounds of cure, right? The key policy outcomes from then and now are now presented here, but more importantly, when we look at the 2020 proposed outcomes in terms of policy, the focus is on sustainable socioeconomic development, coastal resources being protected and more effectively managed, that climate and disaster risk adaptive capacities are strengthened, not only within the coastal unit, but across all the agencies that are involved in integrated coastal zone management. That integrated coastal zone management is delivered through a coordinated governance arrangement, which is to provide strengthened interlinkages with the relevant agencies involved. The capacity for ICZM delivery is strengthened for all the relevant sectors, okay, which ties in very efficiently with the blue economy structure in which we now find ourselves as being members of the new ministry, and that research, understanding, and knowledge outreach is increased. Now, obviously, public education and outreach has always been one of the key cornerstones of the operations of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And this now helps us to re-emphasize how we're going to be able to achieve that in terms of how we can better understand the natural resources and processes that can affect the environment. The plan itself is divided into five subsections. The first part sets the scene in terms of risk resiliency for integrated coastal management. The second part looks at creating an adaptive pathway into terms of how we can move forward in terms of policy implementation to achieve the adaptive pathway. The third part deals with the national guidance and the approaches that form the key skeletal framework on which we build the areas of activity. Then we get into the real meat of the matter, which is the sub-area action briefs to cover all the 8 sub-areas for the coastline, bearing in mind that each sub-area is uniquely different from each other. And then we look towards how the whole process will be implemented in the short, medium, and long term, and what are the output objectives that we want to see as part of any evaluation process. In summary, therefore, we can look and see that government is looking to ramp up the efforts to address the country's coastal vulnerabilities in the face of increasing threats from climate change. The draft integrated coastal plan presents the methods to redefine the boundaries of the coastal management area. We look through the CRMP that the CZMU has already been able to identify vulnerable coastal areas in order to determine and implement the most feasible mitigating measures over the life cycle of the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. And the plan is a 10-year plan stretching from 2020 to 2030. We reinforce the island systems management approach in terms of how it can relate to coastal impacts. And finally, the plan uses the latest knowledge and science on climate change and coastal risks to produce guidelines, legislation, regulation standards, and advisories that are going to carry us into the next decade. Just want to thank you for your attention and hand it back over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brewster. At this point in time, you have a presentation by Jonathan McHugh, who will be followed by Ricardo Arthur. Jonathan is going to speak about this particular sub-area, North Point to Maycock's Bay, and he will look at the challenges which we face in this sub-area. And then Ricardo will wrap it up by looking at the economic benefits of the plan. So I'm tossing it over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Alison, and good evening, everybody. We're going to start with a series of online polls, which you will start to see flash onto the screen in due course. This is to set the scene so that we understand your understanding of the ICZM process to date, plus also your experience on the coast. So we'd like you to operate what you see on the screen by answering the following question. Are you aware of the current ICZM plan for Barbados that was written in 1998? Simple yes, no, or you're uncertain. We've been doing this for all of the sub areas, and this gives us a collective story as to the awareness of stakeholders on the existing HALCRO produced plan. Once the scores have been calculated, they'll be presented on the screen for you. And so tonight's attendees are giving an impression that we have a 71% awareness of the current plan, and 29% were not. So we'll have a second question now. And this question is with regard to the purpose of this evening's presentation, and that is to assess whether you have actually reviewed online or in a library the draft updated 2020 plan that Dr. Brewster has been as initially highlighted. And your options are, firstly, I did not know about it. Secondly, I know of it, but I've not really had time to review it. And thirdly, I've reviewed it in quite some detail. So again, give us your preferred answer, and it will give us an idea as to the well, two fronts, whether it's been successful that you've been aware, or secondly, whether you've had time to look at it. So the majority of this evening's attendees have been very well behaved and said they reviewed it in some detail, which is excellent. A third question is linked more to yourselves, and we're asking, what are your key coastal interests? And this isn't necessarily specific to sub-area 5, but is of value across the country. So your options are, you use it for personal recreation. Secondly, you actually live on the coast. And thirdly, that your business relies on healthy coastal resources that need protection. So the scores will demonstrate to us that we have predominantly people are using the coast for personal recreation. Interestingly, today we don't have anybody living on the coast, but a third of us have a business that relies on healthy resources. And I'll come on to resources in a moment. Final question, again, is related to yourself, and we are looking to understand what type of stakeholder you are. So please select either you're a member of the general public, you're from the private sector, a public institution, or you're representing a non-government association. And the results will give us an answer of tonight's is quite apart from the private sector, we have an interesting spread of general public, and a third of you from public institutions, and 14% from an NGO related organisation. So we'll be compiling those, and that will bring us a story for the 8 presentations. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now just to ensure that we're all on the same page with regards to the global and regional significance of climate change and how this may manifest itself in terms of more localized disaster events, which I'll come on to in a later presentation. And this is important because not all of us are talking day to day about climate change related matters. And it's also relevant because our dialogue today has been sort of overtaken by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the pandemic is not the only global threat that we face that's running in parallel, and that is that climate change continues at pace. And with reference to the climate change story, you as Caribbean people are therefore at the forefront of this planetary threat. And your communities and businesses remain acutely vulnerable to the dangers of rising seas and other impacts that are accelerating with climate change. So with specific reference to Barbados, much of its critical infrastructure is located within the coastal zone. And there's incessant pressure globally to continue with a business as usual state of affairs, meaning that all built assets, whether they're critical or not, should be defended from, for example, climate risks such as flood inundation. However, everything cannot be protected via the adoption of hard engineering solutions. And the cost of this globally, if we did do that, would be absolutely astronomical. In fact, adaptation costs in developing countries are currently estimated at 70 billion US dollars per year, but this is expected to reach up to 300 billion US dollars per year by the end of the decade in 2030. So the Coastal Zone Management Unit over the past 20 years have been studying the effects of climate change on the coast. And their work as part of the Coastal Risk Management Programme has concluded that a series of climate-related hazards must be managed in an integrated manner if any ICZM strategy or plan is to be effective and successful. And in addition to hazards such as oil spills and terrestrial flooding, these must include hurricanes or tropical storms, storm surges, landslides, coastal erosion, and sea level rise. And in addition to that, tsunami wave inundation needs also to be embraced as a possible high impact but low frequency hazard that can take place along the coast. So you heard me mention earlier about what we mean by coastal resources, and this is an important topic just to touch on now, because these coastal resources can include cultural resources that are specific to Barbados, valued seascapes, though more commonly they're understood as being coastal habitats or ecosystems, such as you can see on the screen, beaches, coral reefs, wetlands, coastal cliffs and caves. And protecting these natural resources, therefore, needs to be a national priority. So as you can see in sub-area 5, our talk this evening, the yellow colour, for example, is demonstrating large areas of coral and what would be other reefal type habitats that predominate in this area. And there are also small areas frequented by turtle species for nesting purposes. So this sub-area is also known as an important source of coral sand, which is as a consequence of the reef material being present in this area. And we'll come on to the significance of that a little bit later. So I'm going to introduce another poll question for you now, and this is devoted at capturing this key message that I've just been briefly discussing, and that's the outcome result will help us to confirm the methodology that we've adopted for the creation of a newly defined coastal zone management area. And the question is asking you to rank, in your perspective, the importance, be it low, a score of 1, or very important, a score of 5, a range of coastal resources. And that includes beaches and dunes, coastal cliffs and caves, wetlands, swamps and ponds, coral reefs and seabeds and seagrass beds, cultural resources, and finally, geological formations such as landscapes and important seascapes. So take a moment to go through those and to quickly give your score. So at number 1, like I said, is you don't believe that coastal resource is of significant importance. Number 5, it's of high national importance. So give us your view on those 6 coastal resources. And the results will help to craft the following discussion that I'll be giving on the importance of coastal resources as we define the coastal zone management area. And the results will come on the screen now to give you a bit of a story. So we have a full house with regard to beaches and dunes being of high importance. We have a little bit more of a mix with regard to coastal cliffs and caves, ranging mostly from the mid-range 3 up to very important 5. Importantly, we see wetlands, swamps and ponds scoring 4s and 5s, so they are of high importance. Coral reefs and seagrass beds we see as 100%. Cultural resources, again, high, majority 50%, scoring it as a 4. And geological formations are more of an even spread. And that's interesting because some of the scores are different in other sub-areas, but collectively for this evening, those will be analysed and brought into the assessment. So this presentation builds upon what I've just been talking about and that poll question finding to demonstrate the approach that the team have adopted towards revising the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. And this provides an overview as to how new and innovative setback classifications are being proposed. And as was said in Dr. Bruce's talk, more details of this are found within volume 2 of the plan. So the first question that needs posing is, why do we need a coastal zone management area? And the simple answer is that there is a formal mandate on the Coastal Zone Management Unit to protect coastal resources as defined within the 1998 CZM Act. And it also, importantly, helps to define the boundary or the geographic scope of this revised ICZM plan. So this Coastal Zone Management Area is the area where all relevant coastal resources apply, in addition to those socioeconomic activities that have or may have an impact on coastal resource health, status, or integrity. And as well as the Coastal Zone Management Act, the more recent Planning and Development Act of 2019 states that any new development proposal that's defined within this Coastal Zone Management Area will need to have regard to the provisions and guidelines as set out in the revised ICZM plan. And that means that the unit will be acting in an advisory capacity to all statutory authorities on all relevant policies, regulations, and advisories that may apply within this Coastal Zone Management Area. But note, it should be understood that this CZMA is not the same as a development setback distance. And I'll explain this in the coming slides. But the recent poll that you just undertook demonstrated that a range of coastal resources needs to be considered to help determine the spatial extent of this coastal zone management area. And put simply, highly technical surveys and analyses carried out by the unit over the past decade or so have now all been collated and used to help define a revised inland and offshore limit of the coastal zone management area. And this pays due consideration to the geographic footprint of coastal habitats, plus cultural, geological, landscape and seascapes, as well as coastal infrastructure. And in tandem with the latest predictions of coastal hazard inland limits, a set of detailed criteria has also been used to determine these inland and offshore limits of each separate coastal resource. For example, you can see in pink that for coral reefs, the criteria used is related to the extent of living shallow water coral reef ecosystems, which is often estimated at being close to 150 meters bathymetric contour. Whereas more inland, defined coastal landscape protection areas, as denoted within the physical development plan, should command a 200-meter inland buffer from the coast. The outcome of this new analysis is that the coastal zone management area is variable in its extent around the country. Exact coordinates of this are presented within the revised ICZM plan, and details are included within a specific order, which is entitled the Coastal Zone Management Area's Boundaries Order of 2021. And this includes specific longitude, latitude coordinates, each being about 50 meters apart. You'll see from this slide in green that the Coastal Zone Management Area in Sub-Area 5 has updated inland and offshore limits, which were originally established within the 1998 plan. And you can see that from the blue diagonal lines on the slide. This inland limit has been significantly reduced, as you can see, though it does include the minimum 30-meter setback from mean high water, which is established in the physical development plan. If you see the red arrows, this shows the significant difference from the approach adopted in 1998 by HALCRO, in that the inland limits were commonly defined by the coastal roads that you see in the north and the northwest parts of Barbados. The seaward limit remains similar, however, to the offshore limit that was defined in 1998, with a slight additional increase in its extent around this sub-area. And this contains all the marine resource habitat information, plus protected or restricted marine area extents, areas of outstanding seascape value, and the extent of the surf zone where active sediment transportation takes place. And this is important as it influences beach profile shape. Dr. Brewster mentioned a zone of influence, and you can see this on the screen. This is now also new, and it's been defined to extend from the seaward limit of the coastal zone management area out to the 12-mile territorial limit. And here the role of the unit will be to raise the awareness on marine developments to both the public, private sectors, civil society, and the general public, or where future consideration of an offshore activity is being raised as part of a separate yet parallel blue economy strategy, which is currently underway in Barbados. And this may help to provide advice on developments of joint initiatives to promote conservation and sustainable exploitation of coastal resources within this zone of influence. So before we move on to discuss the new approach defined by setbacks, we're just going to pose a simple additional poll question. And that question for you is just popping on the screen now. The question is, do you agree with the new revised delimitation of this coastal management area compared to that which was defined in 1998? And you have 5 options here. The first one is, yes, I understand the reasoning for the change in totality. The second one is, yes, I understand, but in parts it appears too wide, either inland or offshore. Thirdly, yes, I understand, but in parts it appears too narrow, inland and offshore. Fourthly, no, it's better to remain with what was proposed in 1998. Or fifthly, you have no view in any particular direction. So based on my very quick presentation and what you might have read from the plan and what you've heard and what you think, give us your perspective on an answer to this poll question 6. And the results from that little exercise are demonstrating we've got quite a positive response, 56% in agreement. We have 22% believing that they understand it, but it possibly is too narrow, which is of interest. And again, we got 2 lots of 11% saying, no, maybe it needs to remain as the 1998 limit, which actually gives a broader inland zone to the coastal zone management area. So those are interesting findings, and we'll maybe have those and discuss those in the question and answer session. We shall now briefly outline how the ICZM plan is to use this coastal zone management area to improve climate resilience into development planning through the use of planning setbacks. Why is this needed? Well, setbacks, in fact, are a key tool that's used by coastal planners generally. They refer to areas where development should be restricted or where special provisions need to be imposed or applied to ensure the safety of structures, persons, and wider communities, especially in the context of climate change. And in Barbados, setback policies are not new, though historically linear distances selected were often not technically justified just due to a poor understanding of climate-related impacts. But what the ICZM, this revised plan, is now able to offer is a suite of revised and refined setback distances and categories that are not only dictated by improved scientific understanding, but they're designed to not stand in the way of development to take place, even within defined limits, so long as it complies with necessary environmental impact assessment regulations and technical studies that are deemed necessary by either town and country planning or as advised by supporting agencies such as the Coastal Zone Management Unit. Regarding setback, a series of different policy types are now proposed, depending on spatial topography, conservation or landscape value, and the level of coastal risk that is known for a location. And specific points to note with regard to these setbacks are as follows. Firstly, they only apply to new constructions or developments planned after the approval of this revised ICZM plan. Secondly, they cannot be retroactively enforced for existing developments. Thirdly, they only apply to major developments defined by the Physical Development Plan of 2017. And in general, this means that all new or expanded major developments will need to be located landward of any flood inundation setback limit that has been created. So as mentioned just now, it's important to realize, as even in the case of major developments, that their construction can still take place within defined setback limits, so long as the developer carries out satisfactory studies and has delivered an acceptable environmental impact assessment. So what do these setbacks look like in reality for sub-area 5? Well, you can see they include the following range of possibilities. Firstly, in orange, the minimum 30-metre setback, as defined within the Physical Development Plan, remains for everywhere in the coastal zone management area. This minimum distance may then be enhanced subject to the hazards or the resource protection needs of a specific location. And this extra distance will be determined by separate technical analyses. And this includes the following. You'll see in blue a cliff collapse setback, and this is variable and is classified into 7 setback categories according to cliff type, as you can see on the screen at the bottom right, and as defined by Golder Associates in 2017. And you can see in the supporting grey box above to the right that this can range in setback from 18 metres up to a maximum of an additional 65 metres. In yellow, you'll see a setback, a landscape setback. And again, this is variable and extends between 100 metres in rural areas to 200 metres in formally defined landscape protection zones. And this addresses also the inland limit of the coastal zone management area that I've mentioned to you earlier. So this slide just demonstrates very briefly the detailed geotechnical analysis mapping work that was completed in 2017 from North Point to Maycock's Bay. And it demonstrates risk class categories in different colours, each denoting a level of cliff failure probability and associated setback guidelines for future development within prescribed limits. For more low-lying coastal areas in sub-area 5, setbacks are proposed to include the following. As above, you'll see in the red hashed lines, a minimum 30-metre setback is set, as defined within the Physical Development Plan. And this minimum distance is then potentially added to and enhanced by the following possibilities. Firstly, a climate change adaptation setback. You can see this in just a couple of areas in sub-area 5 in paler blue. Across the country, these are more significant, but they are variable in their extent, and they're estimated using the latest IPCC sea level rise projections, and additional setback distances are recommended based on these new sea level rise predictions. There are also flood inundation setbacks, and these are applied nationally, though they're not specifically on this particular slide for sub-area 5. These again are variable in their extent, and they are designed to include known or modelled storm surge flood inundation limits of a 1 in 100 year return event, plus tsunami flood extent inland limits. So with my last presentation, I'm just going to spend a few moments to go through what Dr. Brewster touched on, which are the details of Part C and Part E of the plan. And put simply, as you can see on the screen, the ICZM plan for sub-area 5 shall at its core seek to provide the guidance that's needed to enforce building guidelines and restrictions such as setback to ensure community safety, to protect buildings and assets whilst retaining the rural character of this coast. And I'll focus on these particular issues in a moment. But Part C represents the general policy guidance that's set nationally for the coastal zone management area. And this part provides guidance for risk-resilient ICZM from a national perspective, as identified within Volume 1, which is the policy framework for the country. And you'll see 10 topics on the screen, and these are covered in quite some detail within Part C of the plan. And perhaps all of these that you see here have a degree of relevance within sub-area 5 in one way or another. And each topic provides a description of the current status of the topic, followed by possible national implications of not considering that specific topic, and the impact that this may have on delivering sustainable ICZM. And from that, a suite of management guidance is then presented on how the topic should be applied in a manner that better embraces climate and disaster resilience. Finally, actions are listed with recommendations on suitable lead organisations to take forward each proposed action. And in addition to that, a timescale for implementation is given, along with an indicator which can be used to measure progress during the lifespan of the plan, which is up to 2030. As you know, this is a major focus on disaster and risk and climate change adaptation. And so a series of pillars are shown on the slide, which will apply to all of the national guidelines. And you can see this with regard to the 4 R's: risk reduction, response readiness, response execution, which are activities during the disaster, and recovery, which includes issues of risk financing. And these all illustrate measures which public and private institutions, corporates, civil society, and communities in Barbados will need to adopt in order to reduce the impacts of disasters or climate change within the defined coastal zone management area. And they also illustrate how the government of Barbados needs to react during and immediately after a disaster event, followed by the steps to best recover from such events after they occur. And Part C identifies which of the 4 R's are most applicable to the national guidance topic provided. So for example, you can see on the screen for beach management that the relevant disaster risk management pillars for beach management are risk reduction, response readiness, and response execution. And so for the guidance specifically for public awareness and stakeholder participation, just as an example, you'll see in the table that preparedness and response are the key disaster risk cycle phases of relevance. And in fact, these tables are produced for each of the 10 general guidance themes, and each of them shows which relevant legislation applies, which ICZM policy and outcome applies, and policy goals. And in addition, a suite of action briefs are then produced for each theme, and these contain a range of actions which aren't necessarily specific, sub-area specific, but you'll be able to identify on the screen lead and support actors that are defined and how each action relates to others, plus the timescales for delivery. And finally, at actions, a suite of indicators are then set to help define how we can monitor progress of these actions over time. Part E is a detailed section, which I don't have time to go into now, but it focuses on implementation. And this is a long-term and continuous process that involves a range of agencies, institutions and authorities, and it's often known as the whole of government approach. And so some elements require immediate action, and some will be more straightforward to incorporate into day-to-day operations of responsible agencies, and others will be more strategic in nature. And in certain situations, elements can be built into existing arrangements or require possibly private individuals and the general public to support implementation. And as you can see in the diagram, all 6 ICZM policy outcomes, you can see as the steps at the bottom, are proposed to be achieved through compliance to 4 priority areas. And these are set out as the pillars in the diagram, which fundamentally adhere to the whole of government approach. And that is There needs to be collaboration, there needs to be capacity to continue, there needs to be commitment, and there needs to be improved communication. And all of these can be read in detail in Part E of the report. And a clear roadmap is set out in Part E, and this is designed to link all the various national guidance actions presented in Part C to the 6 ICZM policy outcomes. And each specific action is then assigned to one or a range of policy outcomes as appropriate. And these are then assigned a roadmap timeline as shown by the different coloured stars, such as roadmap 1, which is the green at short term, roadmap 2, medium term, which is roughly 2 to 5 years, and a roadmap 3 action, which is more longer term. And you can see in Part E goes into significant detail into a range of important supporting implementation topics, including information needs and data management, education, training and public outreach, institutional and capacity related needs, evaluation and monitoring procedures, and importantly, how much is this going to cost, the financial considerations. And on this latter point, the draft plan at the moment, there's no formal figure currently set with regards to the budgets that's required to formally implement this plan. However, following all these sub-area meetings and the various public inquiries, efforts will be undertaken to fine-tune the range of actions proposed so that a more targeted value can be placed on plan delivery over the next 9 to 10 years. So I'm just going to spend the next 5 minutes just wrapping up with regard to local specifics for sub-area 5. And this focuses on identifying a brief description of the various maps that have been produced, and also the focus which is being placed on 3 key themes for sub-area 5. The first one is keeping the rural character, so maintaining the landscape and seascape value. Secondly, that coastal recreation opportunities need to be maximised. This includes walks, hiking, and blue health, which I'll come on to. And thirdly, cliff stability, and what our technical work is actually telling us. So as Alison said in her just introduction to me, there's a suite of coastal communities in sub-areas 5, which range from south to north, including Maycocks, moving north to Husbands and Harrisons, and moving northwards again to Arches, Crab Hill, and up to North Point and Animal Flower Cave area. A range of cultural resources are also present, including Maycock's Bay and Fort, Harrison Point Lighthouse, and fish landing sites at Stroud Bay. In fact, the area is important for fishing areas, as you can see on the slides, along with the areas being quite popular amongst the surfing fraternity, when northerly swells in particular are running. Coastal infrastructure is relatively minor through the sub-area, except for the key features of Maycock Cement Works Pier, the pier area, which exists, and it's visible from some distance away. And you can see on the screen from a hazard perspective, this coastline is predominantly exposed to high swells, waves, winds, and it displays a fairly barren cliff top landscape. And beach erosion and cliff collapse are coastal risks that are most pertinent to this sub-area. So whilst this area presents opportunities for ecotourism and recreational activities, the presence of sargassum and cliff erosion presents some real challenging situations, especially in spots more towards the northern stretches, close to Arches and Crab Hill. And as stated earlier, perhaps the key feature in the sub-area from a cultural perspective includes Harrison's Lighthouse, but also from an industrial perspective, Maycock's cement factory and the industrial activities and coastal developments associated with Arches and Broomfield are important to manage in light of the coastal hazards that are known for this sub-area. And these features are important to embrace as they often threaten safety and the use of coastal space, which can have impacts on local tourism development plans that are being discussed for the area. This slide is taken from Part D of the plan, and based on the risks and features known in Sub-Area 5, it shows a series of possible actions that could be considered. And you'll see on the left-hand side that each possible action assigned for Sub-Area 5 is aligned to the revised general guidance topics, which have already been discussed to you, and we've found in more detail in Part C. For example, you can see that each action is given a unique code, and highlighted in pink, you can see a couple of examples for discussion. Firstly, under the general guidance topic of development planning and setbacks, an action is defined to prepare and distribute guidelines to enforce cliff collapse setback in Sub-Area 5 for developers and public agencies. Likewise, to support the coastal biodiversity general theme, an action is set to promote the rehabilitation of cultural resources and to promote heritage and environmental tourism. And finally, to support the public awareness general theme, an action is set to identify local stakeholders at community level and private developers in the area. And this in many ways could be targeted at reinvigorating the concept of either a national coastal trail or a national coastal path around the country, or at least in part within Sub-Area 5, to maximize the amazing beauty of this wild northwest part of the country for locals and visitors alike. And this may also better embrace or protect the potential surfing value of the area for seasoned surfers or beginners alike. So this slide just is bringing forward to wrap up my presentation, and it shows the legend that has been produced for all the descripted related maps in Part D of the plan. And you can see that these maps only show environmental features, natural or restricted areas, coastal classifications, whether it's eroding, accreting or stable, and any associated flood-related hazards falling within the defined coastal zone management area. And we can see in the northern part of Sub-Area 5 that from North Point through to Stroud Point, that the natural coast is cliffed, but it experiences a medium levels of cliff failure and slippage, with very high areas of failure risk occurring in the Roaches area. As a consequence of these features, and with regard to setback policies, we can see in this part of Sub-Area 5 that there are recommendations for landscape setback up to the limit of the coastal zone management area. And specific cliff collapse setback distances are also defined, which will be subject to different cliff classifications that were given to you early in my presentation. For the remaining stretch, from northeast of Harrison's Point, south to Maycock's Bay, it's clear to see that medium failure cliff events are common, with a degree of flood inundation being experienced along the beaches of the whole sub-area. And again, as a consequence of these features and with regard to setback policies, we can see in this part of the Sub-Area 5 that there are recommendations for landscape setback, and some flood inundation setbacks are assigned to the beach areas south of Harrison's Point. Specific cliff collapse setback distances are also defined, and these shall be subject to the different cliff classifications given to this area as defined earlier in my presentation. So in light of that quick overview to Sub-Area 5, I now invite you just to complete one final poll question before I pass over to the Deputy Director to Ricardo for his presentation. And this final two questions will help to set the scene for the question and answer session. I'd like you to answer the following two points. What measures do you believe in Sub-Area 5 are needed in the future? Do you believe, number one, that new engineering measures are needed? And these could be hard defences, they could be soft defences, or they could be a mix. But do you believe that there's some engineering approach is needed to be targeted in this sub-area? Score number one, if you think, no, it's not engineering that's needed in this area, or score number 5, if you do believe that engineering is the way forward. The second question is whether you believe social measures are needed to support improved vulnerable community resilience to coastal hazards? Again, if you don't think those social measures are needed, score it number 1. If you think that it's very much needed, then score it at number 5. Finally, it's whether you believe new economic measures are needed to help support local fisherfolk or tourism beaches or marine conservation initiatives in sub-area 5. If you believe that an economic measures are needed to re-bolster this area, then I would score that 5. If you think that economic measures are not the priority here, then score it as number 1. So I'll leave you a moment to give you those scores. We'll quickly analyze those results, and then I'll pass over to Ricardo Arthur for his brief presentation. Of interest from an engineering perspective, we've got quite a mix. So we've got no sort of consistent message there from an engineering perspective. From a social perspective, we're getting a strong response from everybody to say that really there's a societal measures that are really going to make the difference in sub-area 5. And again, with regard to economic measures, we're getting a 63% score of people believing that there's probably going to be a need for at least some combination of socio-economic intervention or national policy to really kickstart future sustainable coastal management in that area. So I'll pass now over to Ricardo, who will give his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I need to stop sharing your screen, please. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen? Alison, can you confirm?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, so well, I'm going to give a very short presentation on the economic value of disaster risk management, because essentially what we've been doing over the last 7 years on the project was adding on to the hazard analysis that we've been doing for years and applying a financial and economic lens to look at the impact of hazards, so that we can so we can quantify the impacts and also better mitigate those impacts using cost-efficient measures. So this simple cartoon represents the current paradigm where we have a developer seeking to maximize profits, which often results in using up as much space as possible of available land, while we have regulators trying their best to protect valuable and threatened resources. And we have the firm belief that understanding the economic value of implementing the policies, sustainable development policies in the coastal zone provides a common ground and will incentivize resilience and change the whole discussion. So before we get into the economic lens, just to understand that we spent a lot of money, actually $9.8 million US, improving the science first, because before you want to go and look at the impact of hazards, you have to make sure you have the inputs right. So what you see here is some guys in the field. They were mapping the cliffs using a drone, that little gray spot you see on the right in the air. As you can well imagine, the cliffs, the undercut of the cliff previously was only estimated because there was no real way to get under there. Waves crashing against the cliff face. You're not quite sure what the depth of the undercut, and you're providing setbacks based on an estimate as well as an understanding of the potential recession of the cliff. We did use the drones, and we did some boreholes. So we actually have a new assessment, which is based on the strength of the rock, as well as an accurate measurement of the undercut. And what we see here is actually 3D rendering produced from the drone exercise of a cliff in the northern section of the island. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner, you will see a yellow hatch, which is actually the measured undercut as produced from the radar from the drone. So just showing you the improvement in the science. When you're looking at beaches too, just in terms of the impact of storm surge, this is basically showing you a plot of all the storms that would have impacted Barbados by passing within 500 kilometers of a 100-year period. There was a combination of a database over the last 50 years and then a synthetic database. But the more important thing is to understand that a lot of work went into developing the information that guides the level of storm surge penetration. And lastly, I just wanted to, in terms of the improvement in the science, this green line, I'm sure you would recognize this section of the coastline is actually Hilton. I wasn't able to get a section within this sub-area, but it's important to illustrate the level of data collection. So that green line is a profile line. And when you look at the profile, you will see the water depths in blue to the right of the screen. You will see the breakwater, you will see the sand area, you will see where the vegetation starts in green, and you will see the building and the roof of the building represented in red. So these are all points that were measured using different technology. You know, the behavior of a wave is based on the actual water depths. So we would have modeled the new storm surge analysis using this type of input, understanding how the wave would behave as it traverses this profile. So I just wanted to illustrate that, you know, the science is really cutting edge science that went into the hazard analysis and then the consequent risk assessment, which is the financial element of it. Okay, so this simple box model presents information in relation to the value of what Coastal Zone Management Unit does on a daily basis. Managing coastal and marine assets, including the beaches, the coral reefs, the coastal wetlands, and then the built environment as well. Okay. So what these assets provide goods and services, whether it be for our tourism product, for recreation, just general aesthetic appeal. These assets provide a contribution, and that contribution can be valued in terms of job creation, employment, the management, of course, in terms of the physical development, in terms of avoided losses when we have a storm event. Exercising on the beach, you can actually there are actually creative ways where you can analyze the avoided health costs associated with recreation and exercise on the beaches and so on. And also too, when you manage these resources effectively, there is an increased willingness for people to contribute to their upkeep. So when we speak now of disaster risk management, we're speaking specifically about assets including beaches, coastal property, and the infrastructure. We're looking at services in relation to tourism, risk reduction, maintaining recreation, maintaining the culture and the aesthetic appeal of our beaches. The economic value of investing in disaster risk management can be easily measured in terms of avoided damages to infrastructure. That includes minimize business disruption, because there is the element of it which relates to a structure being built adequately set back and raised to avoid storm surge. But then there's also the savings associated with people getting back to work as soon as possible because the infrastructure is not damaged and work can resume following a hazard. I don't want you to look at this whole table, but I think it is very important to understand. This was, after following the project, there was an independent consultant brought on to do an evaluation of the coastal risk assessment and management program in terms of the performance of the loan. Row 5, which I want you to focus on, looks specifically at the return on the investment based on the avoided losses in terms of tourism revenue, valuing beaches based on tourism revenue. So what row 5 is basically telling you that for the $28 million US borrowed from the IDB over the 25-year repayment period, the benefit of implementing the policy specifically to avoided losses in tourism revenue because you're protecting your beaches is $70.4 million US. So that's very important to understand. The threat of sea level rise alone can create such losses if we don't manage it. In closing, I'd just like to say that, we're not just crunching numbers for trade. So the idea is not to monetize the environment and then people say, well, I don't mind giving up this section of the shoreline, come forward and lose whatever because I know the value of it. And when they do a holistic assessment, it's worth it. No, the whole thing is that we're maintaining our focus of natural resource protection and beach erosion management. And this is an addition to our toolkit, which allows an assessment of the economic benefits that are derived from the controls that we continue to seek to implement. And we firmly believe that the realization of the importance of maintaining the economic benefit flows to the country will create a clear incentive to follow our planning guidelines going forward and completely change our relationship with developers. I think everyone would be on a common ground and understand the incentives towards investment in resilient infrastructure. Thank you. Back to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Now is your chance to ask your questions. And we have a team here with a range of skills who are more than capable of answering your questions or responding to your comments. As I mentioned, we have a team from Coastal Zone Management Unit, as well as our consultants from IH Cantabria in Spain. So remember the two options which I gave you earlier. You can either raise your hand and we will open your mic so that you can speak, or you can type your comments or your question in the button at the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. So we look forward to welcoming and answering your questions and comments here this evening. So try and make sure you have your questions and the thing is, make them as succinct as possible. And we promise on our end that we will make our answers as succinct as possible as well. So I look forward to your questions. There were a couple of questions earlier. Person submitted some questions quite early in the discussion. And someone mentioned, I will start calling some names because we are all here as part of trying to improve Barbados. Is 30 meters really enough? How long will that be sufficient given the increasing sea level rise? Now, which one of you panelists will answer this question for Ms. Harding? Please raise your hand, panelists, if you are will be answering this question. Okay, that is Fabian. Fabian will answer this question for Ms. Harding.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
30 meters is a minimum, okay? So generally it is not enough, but it's a minimum in an already spatially confined area. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to add to Fabian? I see Jonathan. Jonathan, go ahead and follow up.
Yeah, very briefly, it just adds on to what Fabian said, is that 30 meters is the minimum. And the reason why this revised ICZM plan is different is because now, as you may have seen in my presentation, we've added extra setback policies on top of that 30. So if it's in a cliffed area, there's been a lot of assessment to determine the classification of additional distances on top of that 30. If it's not in a cliffed area and it's if it's in a low-lying area, then there are two additional setbacks. One is the flood inundation setback based on 1 in 100-year storm return period distances. And on top of that is a climate change inundation setback. And that is that relates to the IPCC latest climate change scenario predictions that we've been on top of the 30 meters. So hopefully that's answered the question, that we understand that the previous plan was somewhat short on providing that recommendation. Here, the plan has elaborated and through the technical work sort of provided an additional series of setbacks on top of that 30. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I hope we've been able to answer your question with respect to the 30-meter setback. Please let me know. Another question is, how do we prevent dilapidated developments being left in place in order to place more redundant setbacks? I'm fascinated that this author, Ms. Harding, has spoken about redundant setbacks, but who on the panel will be willing to answer this question? Please raise your hand, panelists. Go right ahead, Fabian.
Can you ask the question again? I think I missed something there.
How do we prevent dilapidated developments being left in place in order to place more redundant setbacks? Perhaps the person who raised the question can clarify. If you care to, you can raise your hand and we will open the mic for you. Yes, Miss Harding, you have the mic.
Okay, thank you. I'm referring to some of the shoreline developments that are dilapidated. You would know some on the top of your mind straight away, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would seem as though they're left in place because town and country planning will allow that same footprint to be further developed. So as long as they leave the foundations of this dilapidated building in place, then they basically have pre-approval to redevelop on that same footprint. Thank you.
You're welcome. Fabian?
Okay, that has been a routine, has become pretty routine. First and foremost, the structures are existing, and the general policy is that individuals can redevelop the site within or no further seaward than the existing or the seaward limit of the existing structure, particularly if it is within the existing setback zone. Okay, existing setback area. Whether the structure is dilapidated or not, that basically falls under the responsibility of the owner, unless it is such a health hazard that the Environmental Protection Department or the Ministry of Health, I think they would mark MOH, Ministry of Health, on the structure, and then seek to have a dilapidated structure that is a health hazard to the public removed. I hope I would have answered your question. If there's any further queries, I'll be happy to do so.
If I may, while it might not be the role of the Coastal Zone Management Unit to determine whether the structure has a development right, and that does not apply in every single case in terms of just having a dilapidated structure, in terms of your question. And I'm certain that Mr. Leach can also respond to me. He has his hand up. So can you give Trevor Leach the microphone for me, please? He's an attendee. Go ahead, Trevor. Trevor, your microphone is on. You can go ahead and respond. We can't hear you, Trevor. Try again, Trevor. I can hear you now. Hello. Trevor, we seem to be having some difficulties with your microphone. Are you talking? I'm not hearing you at all. In the meantime, we'll get Ricardo to respond. Go ahead, Ricardo Arthur.
Yes, thanks, Alison. So just in terms of the same question about preventing existing developments, I think when we have the conversation in relation to exposure, and it's clear to a developer that rebuilding on a existing footprint results in potential damage of X amount, and also you actually quantify that. There's an incentive then to invest going forward in a resilient way, rather than just trying to build on a footprint that would have existed when there was 70 meters of beach buffer in front of you, and that whole scenario has changed. I know you understand your exposure and your potential losses. We believe that that would provide incentive to change direction in terms of not just trying to maintain a footprint that leaves you quite exposed to damage going forward.
Yes, Ms. Harding, I hope that we've answered your question. Does Trevor want to try to answer again?
Hello, are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Go ahead, Trevor.
So I was not necessarily responding to that particular particular question. I wanted really to make a comment in relation to the setbacks, and I noticed that on the slides, one of the slides, you indicated that some of the new setback policies are to apply to new development after the plan has been approved. Is that the case? Understanding from one of the slides?
Trevor, not necessarily, because a plan in preparation can be considered as material consideration. So now we can start using these proposals in the plan to review development applications. Go ahead. Can you want to follow up?
I think we lost. I have a technical issue. I lost communication with you.
We can't hear you. You're going in and out.
Hearing me now?
Yes. We can't hear you now, Trevor.
Can't hear me?
You're going in and out. Try again.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, now.
Okay. I'm just having regard to the hazard analysis and the risk assessment, which most certainly would inform the recommendations for the setback. I just wanted to put that in the context of decision making, and to the extent that you are now in a public consultation phase, and given the phase you are in terms of the approval process, that in planning, significant plans and in particular development plans are often taken as material considerations in decision making. So in that context, I just would wish to say that, having regard to the science behind all your recommendations in the stage that you are at, that it seems to me that if you sort of postpone recommendations regarding the new setbacks until after the plan has passed, that you are putting yourself in a situation where, for example, we may be making recommendations for approval of projects that can possibly undermine the wider and important objectives of the projects regarding setback and as a tool, and the objectives for that tool. So that's something that I just wish to make a comment and for you to give consideration to, because development plans, particularly those in the draft stage,
in preparation,
can be material considerations, and having regard to the importance of setbacks, that you wouldn't necessarily want to be at this stage making recommendations that may be at odds with the recommendations that you're going to make, particularly if those recommendations are likely to undermine the objectives.
Thank you very, very much, Trevor. We have already agreed to that, as we all know that a plan in preparation can be considered as material consideration. And right now, as we speak, some of the information coming out of the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program, some of that information is already being used to assess development applications. So while that was noted in the presentation, we are using the plan and the information from the studies to assess development applications. So don't worry, we're using it.
Yes.
You know we would use it as well. Yes. So thank you for that comment. To reassure the public that we are using the latest science to assess their applications. Thank you very much. We have another question. Ricardo? We have a question from a Samuel Innes. Samuel Innes wants to raise a question. Please give him the mic.
Hello, good night. Hello, good night. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Innes.
Yes, just referring to Mr. Arthur's statement of they're following the science. I understand what he's saying, but I have not heard anything about local knowledge. What about the local knowledge of the people that live in the area to know actually maybe for the last 10, 20 years what's been going on with a particular sub area? And I asked a question, I know it's COVID also, we have COVID protocols and stuff to consider, but I've spoken to a lot of fishermen and they really want to take part in this debate, but they can't because of this, they don't have the technology like the smartphones and stuff like that. And I think you guys need to consider somewhere holding a public or town hall meeting pertaining to this year. And my last question is, where can I get a copy of these plans Where can I get a copy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ennis. I'll let Ricardo respond to your first question first. Go ahead, Ricardo. In terms of local knowledge.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Mr. Ennis, we welcome the input. That's why we're having the public consultation process as well. But the risk assessment is based on extreme value analysis. So it would be very useful though to get information in relation to observations over the last 10 to 20 years, as you said. But in assessing the risk analysis, what we really looked at is the 100-year event using some probability tools. But I do take your point, and I think there is a lot of value in getting information, and we have to look into that further in terms of verifying some of the analysis that has been done. So we will definitely look into that, and I think this is a start in terms of the public consultation process, so to understand, if there has been if the findings rather resonate with the public. So thank you for that point, and we will get back to you in relation to how we can gather some more of that data.
So we're not leaving out the local knowledge at all. We really, really like the fact that persons are coming to these meetings and telling us their opinions and giving us idea what is actually happening in specific areas. So we're not leaving out that local knowledge element at all. The other issue is the meetings in person. The meetings in person, Mr. Ennis has asked about this in terms of more people being able to come to meetings in person. I will deal with that one, Mr. Ennis, for you. When we were planning these meetings, we were in the throes of the pandemic. And so we had to go to a plan B. We were going to go around to the community centers. We were going to go to schools. We had already selected venues right across the island to host in-person meetings. But because of the COVID pandemic, we were forced to change course and go to a plan B, where we decided to do the online meetings instead. We understand that obviously some persons might not have access to the meeting, but to these types of meetings. But later on, we might be able to go to some public venues, if possible, if we are permitted to do so. But for the time being, we had to stick to this type of meeting. Ramon would like to expand and answer this question. Ramon, you go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Alison. I was just going to add to your point, Mr. Ennis, if it is that you interface with a lot of fishermen or different community members, community groups, if it is that you can get their questions or obtain some of their queries and pass them on to us either via email, or you can send them into the office or call someone in the office and have them take down the questions, then we can respond to them in this venue. So at least there's a record of our responses to those queries. And since all of these videos are being uploaded to YouTube, there will be a permanent record of our responses. So I know it's not perfect, but that might be another way for us to receive a little bit more community feedback and respond to some of those messages. Thank you.
I'd also like to add, Mr. Ennis, is there a particular location you have in mind with these fishermen? We might be able to come and do an outdoor meetings and set up for these fishermen within the next couple of weeks. If the uptake is good enough, we might be able to do that for these fishermen, seeing that they don't have the technology. Can you release Mr. Ennis's microphone for me? He has a follow-up response. Go ahead,
Hi.
Mr. Ennis.
Hi, good night. Good night again. Yes, I understand. That's what I figured with the COVID, you guys then went online. But I'm
Yes.
saying now, right now it's easing. I would really love a public meeting eventually. I will try to get some more questions. Yeah, meet with some fishermen and try to record some questions for you. There was one more question. Slipped my mind out. Yes, where can I get a copy of this plan and all the information that was put forward here tonight? The public library or up at the coastal zone office, where can I get a copy? I would really love a copy to sit down and study because there's a lot of information given here tonight that I need to study, honestly. And
go ahead.
And yes, there's a lot of questions like I gotta ask, but I need to study the information first so I can put forward my questions in a more suitable and manner.
Mr. Ennis, I'm pleased to let you know that we have them at all branches of the public libraries.
Yeah.
In case you want to see the hard copies of the document.
Please. Yes, please.
At all branches of the public library. They're on our website as well.
Okay. All right. Can I purchase a copy? Can I have a copy, or I have to read it and leave it at the library? What are you saying? Can I actually have a personal copy?
We have no copies for purchase, but you'll have to go to the public library and read it and leave it. But
if sometime in the future, if you can put the copies out there for the public, that'd be great. And one more thing. Here, Jonathan, Mr. McHugh speak earlier about the same sub-5 region we are talking, sub-5 area we are talking about. He was mentioning about the surfing and stuff. And I think the coastal zone management have to understand that surfing is $1 billion industry. I mean, seriously, $1 billion industry. And I think the governments, the DLP and the BLB, all governments do not understand that we are talking about sports tourism and building our economy. And they need to take this into consideration, especially when they're allowing people to build breakwaters and groins and certain things. And down in the north where we are dealing with now, have some of the best waves in Barbados, world-class waves. And this is why I need a copy of the documents and things, because I don't know if they're included actually in your documents. If anybody could answer that question, if like identifying surf zone for surfers and stuff, and then having access to the beaches down there, also emergency access also. This is why I need a copy to find out all these things. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Jonathan has his hand up. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Alison, and thanks for your comments, Mr. Innes. I know that a few years ago we've talked about surfing, and so I'm very conscious of the importance of the issue. And this is probably why I didn't know you were going to be on tonight, but it's actually quite apt that you are, because that particular topic is relevant to when I was talking about the action plan for sub-area 5. What isn't included in the plan throughout the 665 pages is any specific reference to promotion of surfing as a recreational or a business. What is mentioned, though, is the importance to consider how communities in certain areas and stakeholders and users of the coast need to be respected in the final decision. So you might have seen on this, one of the slides I sort of put up was to say, for sub-area 5, it's absolutely pivotally important that sort of community-focused environmental projects or community-focused recreational projects are built in tandem with local views and in line with sort of climate resiliency. So there's no project defined in there to say, yeah, there will be any coastal structure that will impact on surfing, but there's also nothing in there that says that there's any surfing proposal put forward. This will flow out of this ICZM plan. So your comments are very apt, and what I'd probably recommend is have a look at online if you've got access to the internet on the CZMU website. If you want a hard copy, probably going to need to buy quite a few pages to download it and copy it, but that'll be yours for free. So it is there, the details are there, and you've very well articulated the need for local input so that we can update specific reference to sub-area plans in a manner that is, you know, cognizant with the message of this plan, but also the message of the community. So a really good point. I really appreciate it. And I recommend having a look at those sections of the plan. Thank you, Alison.
You're most welcome. Mr. Ennis, I hope we've answered your questions. You can send us your contact information and we'll try to get some information to you on how you can access the plan. Now we have a question about public access to beaches. The question is by Ms. Harding, who says, how will public access to beaches be preserved? And in areas where it has largely been blocked, restored? Please, a member of the panel, can you answer this question for me and for Ms. Harding? It's about public access. I see two panelists. I see Fabian and I see Jonathan. I'll start with you, Fabian. You go right ahead and then Jonathan will follow up.
Good evening again. When we assess applications to develop regarding the development of coastal lands, we always, and I repeat always, seek to preserve accesses to beaches, and where possible, we seek to have new accesses to beaches created, not just for pedestrian access to the beach, but also more recently what we call maintenance accesses, particularly if they're engineered structures. So we piggyback on that to ensure that there is public accesses to beaches that can help serve other purposes, including that for emergency response personnel. And that's in accordance with physical development plan and the policies outlined within. Thank you.
And just
Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. And just to follow on with that, there's you might have heard me talking about part C of the plan. In there, there's quite a lot of detail on the theme entitled beach management. Under the beach management section, Ms. Harding, there's quite a lot of detail on recommended sort of beach access management points, beach access for safety, and guidelines that are going to be produced to support new initiatives. So it's going to be advice for new initiatives. Retrospective guidance issues that Fabian mentioned are basically well answered from there. But I would recommend have a look at part C of the plan under the subtopic of beach management, where across the country, the plan is recommending, in partnership with the NCC, beach management plans for lengths of coast, which will provide clear advice on access, signage, safety, education, and the continuation of those access points over time. So I hope that provides you an answer. Sadly, we don't have time with 15 minutes left to go into much more detail, but I would recommend have a look at that section of the plan.
Good night, everybody. I just want to, Antonio Roy here, Deputy Director, just want to add very quickly, very quickly, that there's also in terms of access to the beach, that also falls under lateral access as well, which along the beach as well, and those that may be blocked. So the point is that the setbacks, part of the issue with the setbacks is that they are supposed to, apart from the whole issue of disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, and we set back to mitigate against the storms, is also to keep accesses along the beach open as well. And so you have unimpeded access along the beach. So I just want to put it in there, the setbacks. And the setbacks, in addition to protection of property, the setbacks are also to protect the environment as well. Because you can appreciate that if you don't have some of these setbacks, you can actually destabilize the beach upon which these structures sit. And I don't want to get into the whole mechanics of that, but you can't destabilize the beach if you don't have an appropriate setback. So the setback is not only just to protect property and people, but to protect the environment as well. And I love lateral access. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio, for responding to that question. I have another question from Miss Janice Springer. She says, St. Lucie has 35 rugged and enchanting bays that have a lot of history to them. Are there plans to develop them as it relates to the heritage tourism, such as at Arthur's, Stroud, and Maycock's Bay? Do we plan to develop these bays and these rugged areas in St. Lucie? Can one of you panelists answer this question by raising your hand? Anyone cares to answer this question? One person is answering, and that is Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan, again.
Again, a very good question. And the very, hopefully the positive answer to that is that there would not be proposals to actively promote anything more than heritage tourism in that area. The plan itself will provide the opportunity and the conduit for community-based discussion on that, but the plan itself is not promoting any particular development in that area. But I think it would go without saying with everybody present that the focus in Archers or Stroud Bay would need to be small scale, sensitive, heritage related ecotourism in that area to blend in with the theme of that sub area. So please don't think that there are active proposals currently on the table as far as I'm aware, but the plan itself is going to be the conduit for promoting sensitive and appropriate development in that particular area.
Thank you, Jonathan. Fabian has a follow-up to your answer. Go ahead, Fabian.
Yes, thank you, Alison. I just wanted to add that since the Archers Bay caps off really the northern portion of the Barbados National Park, you will really find any suggestions for improvement of heritage aspects or anything of the sort outlined in that plan, things like trails and so on and so forth throughout the document. Just an example, not specific for that site, of course, since we don't have sight of it at the moment, but I would just leave that comment there. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabian. Someone has also, anonymous person has also, Dr. Aline, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead, Dr. Aline.
That hand actually went up by accident, but since it went up, just a quick query or question or comment with respect to the land under the land, which includes the seabed and land under the water. And since we were talking about surfing just now, I just wanted to say if the government is regulating land, including land under the water, to what extent is the plan going to give broad strategic guidance in terms of development of that land under the water? I know we have a marine boundary, a seaward boundary, and so just for those who are on the call, just to give them an understanding of the extent to which decision making will be guided by some broad framework. Are there no-build zones? Are there some zones that are conditional? Because Fabian talked about the economics of making sure that our ecosystem services are protected. So to what extent can our citizens expect some broad guidance for that zone?
Anyone on the panel would like to answer this question that was posed by Dr. Ali in a wonderful question? I see one person has their hand up, and that is Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan. Yeah, Dr. Aline, any sort of policy that's related to the seabed, the Coastal Zone Management Unit would only play an advisory role anyway. So this plan that's focusing on their behalf as part of a whole government approach will provide advisory information on applications that may impinge on the sea floor. Separate to this initiative, the audience on the call may like to know that there's a separate marine spatial planning initiative underway, and that will be seeking to, in a participatory manner, provide an assessment of marine users, marine space, and marine potential zones where particular activities are more likely to operate than others. But the question which you're asking is still remains a town and country planning related matter in tandem with the advisory role of Coastal Zone Management. But the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy are currently embarking on a review of institutional issues, a review of regulations that are going to help promote the blue economy. And a lot of those topics will fall under a national ocean policy, which is in parallel to the Coastal Zone Management Policy Framework. So the quick answer is there will be a supporting initiative on things like that, but there is going to be another responsible agency that will have to take ownership of seabed related topics. Thank you, Jonathan. I saw Leo had his hand up. Dr. Brewster, you wanted to respond to this question as well?
Hi, Alison. Yeah, well, I think Jonathan summed it up really nicely. I think it's important to recognize that the ultimate responsibility will still fall to town planning in terms of physical development of some aspects of the sea floor. But as we go further out through the marine spatial planning process that is currently underway through the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, there are other initiatives, obviously, that will be coming into play that will then have different regulatory responsibility that speaks to the rollout of ocean governance. And therefore, he's quite right in identifying the use of marine spatial planning to assist with the better clarification of how the ocean space will be used in the future.
Thanks, Director. Mr. Innes, you have your hand up again. Can you please give Mr. Innes the microphone for me, please? Mr. Innes? Go ahead, Mr. Innes.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
The question was kind of answered, because my question was, why for the longest time you have the Coastal Zone Management Unit, who's in charge of dealing with the beaches and marine spaces and stuff? Why is the Town and Country Planning Office can override what they say? I think this is something that needs to really be looked into and be changed. I think Coastal Zone Management should have the last say when it comes to dealing with the reefs and the beaches and stuff in this island, because they're the ones there that must put policies in place to protect our beaches. So why do town and country planning have the right to override them? Anyhow, the question was kind of answered, and I hope that this, whatever agency or whatever the government put in place to litigate between coastal zone and town and country planning, can deal with this. This is something that needs to be rectified, and soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ennis. Your point is noted, but the Chief Town Planner and the Minister has the powers under the Act to determine applications across the length and breadth of the island. We provide our function in an advisory role where we give expert information to the Chief Town Planner or the Minister, and depending on the type of application. And usually, to be honest with you, most of our recommendations are usually adhered to. There are very few that that depart from the expert advice that is provided by the unit. But it's within the rights of the Chief Town Planner to look at other material considerations. Our document or plan or advice is only one of a set of material considerations that must be considered when you're looking at any development proposal across the island. Anyone wants to add to that, or we can proceed with another question? We're coming up, the time is now about 3 more minutes to go. We're almost there. And I have a question from Mr. Wendell Mapp. He's asked, since flood inundation from hazards are now known to infiltrate deep inland, should there be new legislation to make sure any new development be on columns? Anyone from the panel will care to answer this question from Mr. Mapp? Jonathan, go right ahead.
Thank you, a very good question. A quick answer to that is that the plan will, if you have the opportunity to look at part C of the plan, the general guidance, you'll see a topic called emerging issues. And in the emerging issues section, we've gone into quite some detail on a range of topics, but one of those topics is on overwater restaurants, overwater bungalows, which is basically what you're suggesting with regard to sort of placing development on piled structures. This is quite a relevant question because it does impinge on what we were just discussing with the Marine Spatial Plan, but the plan doesn't go and propose new legislation for tiered structures, but there is some quite strong engineering guidance proposed in there that I think would be of use for you to take a look at, and will apply not just for sub-area 5, but for many parts of particularly the west coast of Barbados. So I'm sure that topic will be raised, Alison, in the next 2 or 3 sub-area meetings as well. So thanks for that.
Jonathan, I think he was referring to areas which are known to be flooded inland. I don't think he was necessarily talking about the areas offshore. He was speaking about using the tool where we can advise someone to raise their floor heights and place the structures on columns. All right, Ricardo wants to follow up. Thank you, Jonathan. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Yeah, just to add, I think the idea is to be flexible and not so prescriptive. So there are a number of engineering solutions in relation to flood mitigation from storm surge, overtopping. So you can actually implement structures, you can enhance your beach, you can raise your floor level. So the key is really to understand the extent of exposure and implement something that's cost efficient in terms of the risk mitigation rather than being so prescriptive.
So the plan is one which gives you a little bit more flexibility. Is that correct, Ricardo?
Yeah, definitely. It gives you flexibility while also providing the incentive. So the whole financial analysis allows the developer then to kind of input the information into a spreadsheet for their business model and understand how they can best reduce their potential losses over the life cycle of the project.
Thank you very much. And we have one final question, which I was hoping to bring to you earlier, and it says, who is responsible for the safety of the Ararat cement bridge? Who is responsible for this bridge? I'd first like to know who's not the Coastal Zone Management Unit at all. Who is responsible for this? And someone answer, please.
Good night again. So the Ararat cement plant is actually responsible for the safety on that bridge. In fact, they have an entire health and safety unit that's responsible for the safety of the plant, everything on it, the people, and all its infrastructure. So in terms of safety, that falls under the Ararat cement plant. So I hope that answers the question very, very quickly, because I'm not being out of time.
I don't see any more questions at all. If there are no more questions, feel free to contact us at any point in time. At this point in time, therefore, we have 2 polls at this point in time. Jonathan?
Okay, fine, thanks. Thanks for your attendance this evening. We have 2 final polls for you to answer. And it sort of brings together the discussions and your views and perspectives on the plan that you've heard so far. So on your screen, you'll see 2 questions. First one is, how highly would you rate the intentions of the updated ICZM plan, ranging from poor to excellent? And the focus there is the intentions in terms of what the the delivery vehicle for making Barbados' coast more climate resilient. So your view on that would be most welcome. And the collective scores are giving a good response, 25% very good, 63% excellent. So the message is getting through, which is good news. And our final question is focusing on the sub-area 5 communities. And with regard to the updated plans, policies, and proposed actions, do they make you feel more confident that future management of the sub-area will be more resilient to climate change and disasters? How far do you agree with that statement? So do you feel that the communities will be more resilient to the impacts of climate change and disasters as a consequence of adhering to this new revised plan? Do you strongly disagree, or strongly agree, or somewhere in between? And the collective scores from that are giving a good impression that 71% agree that there's going to be an improved resiliency for communities within the sub-area. So we're going to bring those results together. On behalf of myself, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to pass over back to Alison to lead for the final presentation.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm telling you, this was the best sub-area meeting we had. I mean, those questions were absolutely great. But don't forget, you can still send us some more comments and queries. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Antonio Rowe, the Deputy Director of Unit, who will give the vote of thanks and who will also remind you that there's a final exit poll when you're about to leave the meeting. Antonio, over to you.
Okay, good night. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we really come to the end of tonight's sub-area meeting. As Alison said, it was very interactive. Really like questions, and hopefully from here on in we will have these type of interactions. This, I believe, concludes what we would call the Atlantic Coast set of sub-areas, if I'm not mistaken. And I hope that the information that you got tonight has, assisted in you understanding what the plan is about and how it impacts the sub-area. As been stated many times during the night, the plan is available online if you have means to get it that way, or you can go sit and have a look at it at the public libraries. And if you have any further questions, you can please send them to us either at the website at www.coastal.gov.bb or to our WhatsApp number, which is evading my memory right now, 256. I think Alison can please give the number when we finish here. So thank you very much for attending. And please have a good night all. Now, do not forget, do not just turn off the computer. There's an exit poll that's coming up afterwards. We would really like you to fill out the form. Thank you.
So remember, if you have any questions or queries, you can go to our website and there's a form that you can fill out, that you can send your information, questions, queries, just comments to us. And you can also contact us using our WhatsApp number 256-3173. And if you care to, you can contact any member of the Coastal Zone Management Unit as well. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve the Barbadian public. We're here to make sure our coast is a coast to be proud of. Thank you, everyone. Our next meeting is on the West Coast. It is from Maycock's Bay to Back's Rock, a long stretch of land. And that is characterized by beaches primarily. So we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting, which is on Thursday at 6 p.m. I hope to see each and every one of you at that meeting. Have a good night and stay safe. God bless.